Meet Nora Ellison, a 66-year-old mother they called the Maid. But when silence became strength, she walked out and rewrote everything. If you believe it's never too late to reclaim your worth, subscribe for more true stories of dignity, drama, and quiet revenge. My name is Nora Ellison. I'm 66 years old, a widow, and a retired school counselor. For most of my life, I believed in grace and kindness, in staying quiet when it wasn't your turn to speak. I spent 32 years sitting across from students in small chairs, helping them navigate the mess of growing up. I had a gift for listening, a way of leaning in, nodding, just enough not judging too quickly. I thought those same skills would serve me well in my own old age. I thought wrong. It was after the surgery, nothing too serious, but serious enough that my son Caleb suggested I move in with him and Sierra for a while. We've got the space, he said over the phone. And Sierra loves the idea of having you around. It'll be good for everyone. I remember his voice warm, casual, like he was doing me a favor, but I wasn't in the mood to argue. John had been gone 8 months at that point. The house in Pasadena felt like a mausoleum. I'd walk into rooms and forget why I entered. Sometimes I'd sit in his recliner and hold his old flannel shirt like a second skin. The nights were the worst, too, still too sharp. So when Caleb offered, I said yes. Their apartment was modern slick, 32nd floor, wide glass windows overlooking Los Angeles like a painting that never changed. Everything was white and stainless steel and soft gray concrete. Clean, cold. Sierra designed it herself, or so she said. She was an influencer, one of those women who turned their lives into brands. Smooth hair, perfect teeth, latte in hand, always smiling for some invisible audience. I didn't understand most of what she did, but I stayed out of her way. I wasn't there to interfere. I was there to heal, to help, to belong if that was still possible. The first few weeks were quiet, polite. I made myself useful. I cooked, I cleaned, I helped with errands. I left little envelopes of cash in the kitchen drawer, enough to cover groceries and more. I did it quietly so Caleb wouldn't feel awkward. I folded towels the way Sierra liked them folded. I learned how to stack their dishwasher, how to make their bed. I memorized the settings on their espresso machine even though I preferred drip coffee. I tried not to make noise when I moved through the apartment. I tried not to take up space. They didn't ask me to do any of it, but they didn't stop me either. Caleb was always busy, calls, meetings, startups, networking. He was building a business that I barely understood, something with data analytics and branding. He worked late. Sierra was always filming, editing, uploading, scheduling, arranging things just so. Sometimes when she passed me in the hall, she'd give me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and say, "Thanks for the help, Nora." I'd nod, say nothing, keep moving. I told myself it was just adjustment, that we were still finding our rhythm, that I wasn't a burden. But somewhere deep inside, I felt it, a quiet knowing that I was not really part of the life being lived in that apartment. I was a ghost with good intentions, a polite intruder with folded laundry in hand. Then came the dinner. It was a Thursday night. Sierra had spent the whole week planning it, something important for Caleb's company. A client dinner, high-profile couple, social capital types. There were caterers involved at first, but something fell through and Sierra asked me casually, like she was asking me to pick up milk, if I could help with the cooking instead. "Just a homey touch," she said. "You're so good at roast chicken, right?" I nodded. "Of course. Roast chicken, rosemary, potatoes, lemon, asparagus." I wrote it all out in my head before I even left the kitchen. I spent the day preparing. Grocery bags on my lap in the Uber, chopping in silence while Sierra rearranged the dining room centerpiece. I worked carefully, deliberately, timing the sides, heating the plates. The table sparkled. The food smelled like something you'd remember years later. I wore my nicest cardigan and brushed my hair back the way John used to like it, I wanted to look presentable, professional even, like someone who still mattered. The guests arrived right at 7. Heels clicked on tile. Perfume lingered in the air. Laughter floated into the kitchen in polite bursts. I stayed mostly behind the scenes, pouring wine, bringing out dishes, clearing as they finished. Smiling, saying little. Sierra glided through the evening like a hostess out of a magazine. Caleb talked fast and confidently, cracking jokes, explaining figures, talking about vision. I stood in the doorway for a moment just watching him. My son, my only child. I remembered his kindergarten art projects, the way he used to fall asleep in the backseat mouth open, the way he used to ask me to sing during thunderstorms. Then it happened. The woman, one of the clients, perfectly dressed, perfectly poised, tilted her head and said, "Oh, and who is this lovely lady helping out tonight?" Her voice was sweet, unassuming. She didn't mean any harm. Caleb didn't even hesitate. He looked up from his plate, grinned, and said, "Oh, don't mind Mom. She's basically the maid around here." Silence, then laughter. Light, nervous, unsure. But Sierra laughed, and so did the clients. And so Caleb laughed again, pleased with himself. A joke. Just a joke. I stood there frozen, my hand still holding the empty salad bowl. I felt heat rise in my chest, then settle cold in my stomach. I smiled, or tried to. I think my lips moved. I said, "Excuse me," and turned back toward the kitchen. I didn't cry. Not then. Not with an apron still tied around my waist. Back in the guest room, the room they never truly meant to feel like mine. I sat on the edge of the bed, still as stone. The lights of Los Angeles blinked outside the window. I stared at them without blinking, letting the shame settle over me like a second skin. Not anger, not yet. Just disbelief. Quiet, hollow disbelief. That this was my son. That this was how I was seen. That everything I'd done, the meals, the money, the effort, had become a punchline. I stayed awake the whole night. I didn't move. I watched the light change on the ceiling. I thought of John, of the life we built, of the son we raised. And sometime before sunrise, something shifted. Not all at once, just a small, clear decision. I would not stay where I was unwanted. I would not be reduced to an afterthought. I would not ask to be seen. I would leave. By the time the sun stretched its pale light across the skyline, the apartment was silent, the kind of silence that follows a storm even if no one else noticed it had passed. I sat on the edge of the bed, still dressed from the night before, the cardigan neatly buttoned, my hands folded in my lap. There was no need to repack. I had never truly unpacked. Every sound that morning felt louder than it should have been. The zipper of the suitcase. The quiet snap of the closet door, the wheels rolling across the polished floor. I moved slowly, deliberately. I wasn't running. I wasn't flustered. I was a woman who had made up her mind. I left the guest room just as the coffee machine in the kitchen hissed its first breath. Caleb was standing at the counter in a t-shirt and joggers, hair still messy from sleep. Sierra sat on one of the white stools, scrolling through her phone like nothing in the world could possibly touch her. Caleb looked up first, noticing the suitcase. His brow furrowed. "Mom, what's going on?" I set the keys down on the marble island between us, just 2 silver pieces of metal on a keychain that said, "Bless this home." I had brought it with me when I moved in. I don't know why. Hope, maybe. Sentiment. Habit. "I'm heading out," I said softly, almost kindly. "This isn't the right place for me." Caleb blinked, confused. "What do you mean, you're leaving?" "Yes," I said with a calm that surprised even me. "This has never really felt like home." And last night made it very clear why. He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised a hand gently. Not to scold, not to accuse, just to hold the moment steady. "I cooked your meals. I cleaned your space. I helped pay your bills. But I wasn't your maid, Caleb. I was your mother. His face shifted slightly. A flicker of shame, maybe. Or maybe just embarrassment. Sierra stayed silent. She didn't even look up from her phone. And that joke you made, I continued. Still calm, still steady. That wasn't just a poor choice of words. That was everything you've been thinking but never had to say. You said it because you could. Because everyone laughed. Because you knew I wouldn't cause a scene. He looked down now. Good. I took one step back from the counter, resting my hand on the suitcase handle. I'll send someone to pick up the last box next week. Don't worry, I won't leave a mess. He started to say something, an apology maybe, or a defense, but I didn't stay to find out. As I rolled the suitcase toward the elevator, the hallway swallowed the sound of my footsteps. It wasn't a dramatic exit. No shouting, no tears, just clean air, just space. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. I stepped inside and turned around just once. I half expected Caleb to come out to stop me to say he was sorry not for the joke, but for forgetting who I was. But the hallway stayed empty, and somehow that made it easier. As the elevator descended floor by floor, I felt something shift in my chest. The kind of shift that happens when you've carried something heavy for too long and finally put it down. Not all the pain, just the illusion that it didn't matter. When the doors opened to the street level, Los Angeles greeted me like it always did, loud, bright, indifferent. I stepped out with my suitcase, no destination yet. But for the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't walking in circles anymore. I didn't know what came next, only that it wouldn't be a dinner table where I was the joke. It wouldn't be an apartment where I had to earn the right to exist. It wouldn't be someone else's version of grace. I didn't walk fast that morning. I didn't need to. I walked steady, one quiet block at a time. And with every step, I left behind not just an address, but a role I would never play again. I moved into the studio on the corner of Soto and Whittier without much ceremony. One suitcase, a duffel bag, and a Tupperware container of photographs were all I brought with me. The apartment smelled like dust and old carpet glue, and the faucet in the kitchenette leaked a slow, stubborn drip that kept me awake the first few nights. But it was mine. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a guest in someone else's life. East LA wasn't the kind of place Sierra would film an Instagram reel in. It didn't have artisan matcha cafes or exposed brick walls with phrases like "live, laugh, love" painted in cursive. No, here, the walls were stained with years of weather and survival. The sidewalks cracked like tired bones. The corner stores still took cash. And yet, in some strange way, I felt more seen walking to the laundromat than I ever did in that 32nd floor apartment. I didn't talk to anyone those first few weeks. I kept to myself, slept in late, cooked in silence, stared out the window at a view of chain-link fences and graffiti that changed every weekend. I thought a lot about Caleb, about John, about who I was now that I didn't belong to anyone. Loneliness is strange. It doesn't always feel like sadness. Sometimes it just feels empty, like standing in a room and realizing you've forgotten why you walked in. I'd wander down to the corner mart each morning just to see another face, just to hear someone say, "How's it going?" Even if they didn't mean it. I'd pick up a coffee, sometimes a magazine, sometimes nothing at all. Then, one Tuesday morning, as I stood at the register with a banana and a pack of gum, I saw them, those little rectangles by the register. Scratchers. The neon colors, the glittery fonts. They used to make John laugh. Nothing but highway robbery, he'd grumble, then buy one anyway. He'd scratch them with the edge of a house key, hopeful in a way that embarrassed him. Once, 20 years ago, we won $100. We took it straight to a diner and ordered the most ridiculous brunch two middle-aged people could dream up. I hadn't bought a ticket since he died. Until that morning. One of those, I said, pointing without thinking. The cashier slid it across the counter board. I pocketed it, and walked home in the cool gray light of early spring. I didn't scratch it right away. I made tea first, toasted a slice of sourdough, sat down at the tiny formica table in the corner of the room. I didn't feel excited. I didn't feel anything. I used a quarter, and just like that, like a whisper I almost missed, there it was. 18,400,000. I froze, not laughed, not cried. I checked it again, checked the back, read the fine print twice. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a misprint. It wasn't a dream. It was real. I stood very still. I could hear the drip from the faucet again, the hum of the refrigerator, the breath in my own chest. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone. I didn't jump or dance or fall to my knees. I just sat for a long time. What do you do when everything changes and there's no one to tell? I made another cup of tea. I sat there for 3 hours staring at the card like it might vanish. Then I picked up my phone, not to call Caleb, not to tell anyone. I Googled how to claim California lottery anonymously. That was the first step. By Friday, I had a lawyer. By Monday, I had a plan. No one knew. Not Caleb, not Sierra, not even my neighbor who sometimes knocked on my door to ask for extra sugar. Because this wasn't for show. This wasn't for bragging. This was for silence, for dignity, for something I couldn't quite name, but I knew I had to protect. I opened a trust, transferred the winnings, set up a holding company, and then I started reading. I read everything: real estate law, commercial leasing, urban zoning. For weeks, I buried myself in PDFs and courthouse records in whispers of possibility. And one afternoon, as I scanned through property listings and public records, I saw it. The building on Spring and 9th, the one with the glossy office suites on the 5th floor, the one that housed a small startup run by a man named Caleb Ellison. And next door, the studio of a woman named Sierra Lee coaching lifestyle influencers how to own their power. I stared at the listing like it had spoken to me. That building was for sale. It wasn't revenge I felt. It wasn't rage. It was something quieter, something cleaner, a deep bone set knowing I was going to buy it, not to ruin them, but to remind myself who I had always been. Because while they saw a maid, I had become the landlord. My name is Nora Ellison, and by the time I stepped into that dusty studio apartment in East LA, I had already disappeared in every way that matters. I didn't just lose my home. I lost my place. My name used to mean something, if only to a few people, in a quiet suburban school district. Mrs. Ellison, the counselor who brought cinnamon tea to parent meetings, who remembered which children needed more time, who taught angry teenagers how to breathe through their hurt. Then I was just mom. Then I was just the maid. And then for a while, I was no one at all. The apartment was a box with walls, the kind of place you find when you're not really looking to live, just to hide. There was a single window cracked in the corner facing an alley with trash cans that spoke more than neighbors ever did. The carpet smelled like old rain. The radiator coughed when it felt like it. The fridge was an off-brand thing, with rust along its side like a wound no one bothered to dress. I didn't complain. I didn't even mind. After everything that had happened, after Caleb's words at that dinner, after the look on Sierra's face as she let them land, I didn't want beauty. I didn't want noise. I wanted a space where nothing expected me to smile. I bought my meals in silence, shopped for the cheapest produce at the market 2 blocks over, ate soup from the can, wore sweaters I hadn't unpacked since John's funeral. I moved slowly, deliberately. I didn't call anyone. I didn't tell Caleb where I had gone. I doubt he even asked. And then one morning, a Tuesday, I think I walked down to the corner mart, like I had a dozen times before. The same faded awning, the same sun-beaten advertisements taped to the glass. I stood in line behind a man with paint under his nails, listening to the hum of the refrigerator where the milk was always one day from spoiling. I wasn't buying anything important, just a banana and a small pack of saltines. I didn't know why I bothered. Hunger wasn't really the kind of thing I felt anymore. And then I saw them, right by the register. A fan of scratch-off tickets, all bright colors and promises. Lucky 7, Millionaire Dreams, Strike Gold. I almost looked away, but something in me, maybe it was John's old grin or some ghost of a memory, made me point. "I'll take one," I said. My voice cracked when I said it. The woman behind the counter didn't even blink. She tore one off, slid it to me with 2 fingers. I paid. I didn't even check which one I got. I walked home with the banana in one hand and the ticket in the other, folded in quarters like something too sacred to be seen. I didn't rush. There was no thrill, no giddy hope. Just a quiet hum in the back of my mind, like the wind before a storm. I sat at my small kitchenette, the ticket flat on the table, and stared at it for a long time. The room was too still. I could hear the ceiling creak the way it always did when someone upstairs walked across the room. I could hear my own breathing, slow and shallow, as though my body wasn't sure it wanted to keep trying. And then I picked up a quarter. Not even mine, it had come with a roll of laundry tokens. I scratched the first row. Nothing. The second, nothing. Then on the third, 3 numbers in a row. $18.4 million. I stared at them. Scratched again. Read the instructions. Read them twice. I didn't believe it. Not even for a second. I stood up. My legs shook. I turned the ticket over. Checked the symbols again. Looked for the phone number to verify it. Then sat back down. I didn't call anyone. I didn't scream. I didn't even smile. I poured myself a glass of water and drank it slowly. By the time I reached the corner of Hope Street and Olympic, the city had already started to hum. Delivery trucks sighed into alleyways. A jogger with earbuds passed me by without so much as a glance. The morning light, thin like old tea, settled between buildings, and my shadow followed me in pieces across the cracked sidewalk. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't turn around. The apartment building behind me wasn't home. It never had been. I walked for an hour before I found the listing, half-torn, taped to a laundromat window with a curling corner. Studio. East LA. Month to month. Utilities included. I tore the number off, called, and within 2 days, I had keys in hand. The woman who showed me the place didn't ask questions. She handed me a lease printed in faded ink and pointed toward the coin-op washer like it was a feature. I signed. I paid in cash. And then I was alone. The apartment was no bigger than my old walk-in closet. The walls were beige in the way hospital walls are beige, apologetically neutral. There was no proper stove, just 2 electric burners that buzzed when I tried to boil water. The mattress was thin. The ceiling cracked and the window overlooked a parking lot where someone's car alarm went off every night around 2 a.m. But it was mine. It asked nothing of me. It didn't pretend to love me. I unpacked slowly. A stack of sweaters. A framed photo of John and I from our trip to Maine. He was holding a lobster claw like it was a trophy, and I was laughing in a way I hadn't in years. A ceramic bowl I had made in a community pottery class, now chipped. I set it all on the single shelf above the bed and sat down in the folding chair that came with the room. For a long while, I didn't move. The days passed in a strange blur, quiet and long. I started walking in the mornings just to remind my legs they still worked. I learned the names of streets not by signs but by scent. The one that smelled like tortillas and bus fumes. The one that smelled like wet cardboard and oranges. I bought instant coffee, canned soup, and day-old bread. I didn't talk much. No one asked. That suited me just fine. One morning, maybe 10 days after I'd left Caleb's apartment, I went to the corner mart for a bottle of water and a banana. The clerk barely looked at me, but that was nothing new. As I reached for my change, my eyes landed on the display beside the register, rows of lottery tickets, bold and tacky with names like Money Frenzy and California Gold. They reminded me of John. He used to buy one every month just for the fun of it. It's not about winning, he'd say, scratching at the foil with a house key. It's about giving fate a little nudge. I hadn't thought about fate in a long time, so I bought one. I didn't even look at which kind. I slipped it into my coat pocket and walked home without touching it. Back in the apartment, I set it on the table and stared at it. It was absurd, childish, the kind of thing you do when you've run out of grown-up answers. But I didn't throw it away. Instead, I made tea, black, no sugar, sat down at the table, pulled out an old quarter from my purse, and slowly began to scratch. I wasn't expecting anything, not even a consolation prize. But then, something. 3 matching numbers, a row of 7s. I blinked, looked again. $18,400,000. The ticket slipped from my fingers and landed face up on the floor. I sat frozen in that rickety chair, the kettle still hissing behind me. This wasn't possible. I picked it up again, checked the instructions on the back, cross-referenced the symbols, read it out loud like hearing it might make it real. It was. The next 3 hours passed in silence. I didn't speak. I didn't move, save for the occasional sip of cooling tea. I thought about calling Caleb, about telling someone, anyone, but the idea made my stomach turn. No, this wasn't theirs to know. This was mine. By dusk, I had made my decision. I walked 5 blocks to a cafe with free Wi-Fi, ordered the cheapest drink they had, and sat in the back with my phone. I Googled lottery winnings California anonymity. The answers were not reassuring, but there were options. Legal structures, trusts, attorneys who specialized in this kind of thing. I bookmarked 10 tabs. The next day, I called a name at the top of the list. Her name was Meredith. She spoke like someone who had already dealt with people like me. Quiet, stunned, skeptical. Yes, she said. It's real, but if you want to keep it, really keep it, you'll need to disappear. And so I did. Within 3 weeks, the money was claimed through a blind trust. A shell company was formed. Everything was rerouted, restructured, hidden beneath layers of legalese. I was still Nora Ellison, still 66, still living in a dusty apartment in East LA. But behind that name now was something else. Something sharper, heavier, stronger. I didn't spend a dime, not yet. Instead, I studied. At first, just out of curiosity, but then with something deeper. Obsession, maybe, or purpose. Property acquisition, urban development, commercial real estate loopholes. I printed out zoning maps and lease templates. I watched videos of wealthy men explaining amortization schedules and tax incentives, scribbling notes like I was back in my classroom days. My mind, which had once memorized the names of 700 students and their emergency contacts, sparked back to life. And one afternoon, as I scrolled through listings in downtown LA, I saw it. The building, 5 floors, glass facade, rooftop lounge. I clicked. 5th floor home to a boutique media startup called Strive Co. Founder Caleb Ellison. Adjacent suite, Sierra Lee Coaching. I stared at the screen, breathless. Of all the offices in Los Angeles, of all the buildings for sale, this was the one. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I just whispered so low only the room could hear. Of course. I didn't buy it immediately. That would have been foolish. I read the listing 4 times a day for a week, memorized the agent's name, the square footage, the tenant roster, the pending city inspection noted in the fine print. There was mold damage in the lower stairwell. The HOA had filed 2 complaints about the rooftop railing. These weren't red flags to me, they were leverage. Meredith helped set up the next layer. She introduced me to a man named Alan, early 60s, wore expensive shoes and even more expensive silence. He handled things for clients who preferred to remain nameless. He didn't ask why I wanted that building. He didn't blink when I told him to use the shell corporation we'd already formed. Just let me know what price you want to walk away with, he said, and I'll take care of the handshakes. By mid-July, I owned the building. Just like that. No ribbon cutting, no champagne. Just a stack of signed documents delivered by courier to a mailbox under a false name. I sat at the same kitchenette table with a mug of black coffee staring at the paperwork that said, I controlled 24,000 square feet of prime downtown real estate, including 200 of those square feet rented to my son. I thought I'd feel triumphant. I didn't. I felt still, like something had landed, not exploded. There was no satisfaction in having power if it came from the same place as cruelty. So I waited. I watched. I visited the building once, dressed in tan slacks, sunglasses, hair pulled back. I walked through the lobby like a woman considering a manicure, nodding to the doorman who didn't even glance up from his phone. I took the elevator to the 5th floor. When the doors opened, I saw it all. The brushed metal logo for Striveco affixed to a matte black wall. The glass door of Sierra Lee Coaching with cursive font and golden decals that read, Build your brand, build your life. I stood in the hallway for a full 3 minutes. They didn't see me. Caleb was pacing inside his office phone to his ear, gesturing. The same boy who once asked me to iron his shirt for the 5th grade play. Now talking investor buzzwords in a corner suite I had just purchased. Sierra was filming a video. Ring light glowing, voice sharp and rhythmic. You have to know your worth, she said into the lens, not knowing that her rent check would soon come to me. I didn't smile. I left before they could notice. Back home, I rewrote the leases, tripled the rent, added clauses that protected my holding company from legal retaliation. Inserted a 30-day review period, non-negotiable. I mailed the new contracts to the property management firm under the LLC's directive. The building's current manager, a brisk woman named Tony, handled the handoff. She emailed both tenants. Your current lease will expire in 31 days. Please review the attached new agreement if you wish to remain in your suite. No names, no warning, no fingerprints. I imagined them opening the email. I imagined the silence in their offices as they read the new terms. The panic, the confusion. And still I didn't gloat. Because this wasn't punishment. This was structure. This was a boundary drawn in brick and mortar. Caleb called the building manager 3 times. Sierra sent a legal inquiry. I had Alan respond with the company's boilerplate language. We value our tenants. Terms are standard. Thank you for your cooperation. 31 days. And then the clock would strike. I didn't watch it tick, I listened to my own breathing instead. Sometimes taking back your life doesn't look like screaming in someone's face. Sometimes it looks like buying the building they bragged about leasing and never telling them you were the one who turned off the lights. I always believed power was loud voiced by men in suits echoing through boardrooms and concrete towers. I thought it had a sound, a signature, a weight that entered a room before you did. But I was wrong. Real power, the kind that stays, that binds, that builds or unbuilds a life, it's quiet, precise, patient, and it doesn't ask for recognition. It just is. The morning Caleb received the new lease, the sky over downtown was overcast, the kind of pale gray that makes buildings look tired, like they're waiting for rain. I sat in my apartment in East LA, stirring cream into my coffee, rereading a zoning report while the kettle hissed beside me. Somewhere across the city, my son was walking into a problem he couldn't name. Yet, I imagined him walking into the office, earbuds in, already agitated by traffic. Sierra would be in the conference room filming her morning affirmation series, Set the Tone, or some other plastic mantra. Their assistant, a 20-something named Brinley, who wore acrylic nails and called me sweetie the one time I met her, would probably be the first to open the email. Lease renewal. Immediate action required. I knew what came next, confusion, then indignation. A flurry of Slack messages calendar invites half-baked legal threats. It was all happening without me needing to lift a single finger. I hadn't changed my phone number, but no calls came. Caleb didn't suspect. Sierra wouldn't have imagined. They were too busy scrambling for solutions that didn't exist, convinced someone somewhere had made a mistake. That's what ego does. It convinces you the universe owes you clarity. But I wasn't the universe. I was just his mother, the one he called the maid. And I had rewritten the terms. Alan had warned me. Tripling the rent is aggressive, he said over lunch one afternoon. They'll panic. Might fight it. I folded my napkin slowly. I'm not looking for a fight, I replied. I'm setting the price of staying in my world. What I didn't say, what I didn't need to, was that they had priced me out of theirs a long time ago. The building manager, Tony, forwarded me the first email response from Caleb's office. It was terse. From Caleb Ellison to management. Hi. There must be an error in the attached lease. The numbers can't be right. Our rent was stable for 2 years. Please advise. C. Ellison. Tony asked if I wanted to reply directly. I told her no. I wanted him to feel what I had felt, that odd, airless drop in the chest when you realize no one's coming to explain things, that you're alone in a new game, and someone else is holding the board. Sierra's response came next. It was longer, more dramatic. From Sierra Lee to management. Hello. This new agreement is completely unreasonable. Tripling rent with no warning. I have 14 clients scheduled for in-person coaching over the next 6 weeks. I need to speak to ownership immediately. Please connect me with someone who can clarify what's happening. Respectfully, Sierra. Respectfully. That word made me chuckle. She didn't respect anyone who couldn't offer her visibility funding or a photo op. Not when she looked through me like I was part of the furniture. Not when she handed me her coat at her holiday party like I was the hired help. Now she wanted clarity. She would receive paperwork. Alan drafted a formal reply. The lease adjustment reflects current market value for similar spaces in the downtown corridor. All terms are final and non-negotiable. If your business is unable to comply, we understand and will consider other applicants. Please respond by the 25th to confirm renewal. Polite, cold, absolute. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even smile. I sat back in my chair, watched the steam rise from my tea, and felt something shift in me, a settling, not a thrill. Like furniture finally placed where it belongs. Like a room rebalanced. This wasn't petty. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. My son had removed me from his life with a sentence. Now I was redrawing the sentence structure of his. And the best part, he still didn't know. Not yet. But the cracks were beginning. And the walls. They were mine. Sierra was always better at pretending. She knew how to smile while falling apart, how to post a curated breakdown and call it vulnerability. Caleb, on the other hand, was easy to read when he unraveled. He got sharp, loud. He'd start moving papers around just to feel like something was being done. That week, according to the property manager's reports, he booked a series of meetings with potential investors, pitched a growth story he barely believed in, and pulled 3 all-nighters trying to calculate a way to absorb a 300% rent hike without bleeding out. Meanwhile, Sierra launched a flash sale on her glow-up blueprint, promising 50% off for first-time clients who booked 5 sessions in advance. Desperation has a scent. And from where I sat miles away in my dim apartment, with its crooked blinds and humming fridge, I could smell it as clearly as I had smelled the condescension in her laugh the night Caleb called me the maid. That laugh still echoed in my mind, not because it hurt, but because it revealed more than she intended. She didn't see me. Not really. She saw someone who cooked and cleaned and existed in the margins of her picture-perfect life. And now I was the silent owner of the frame. On the 23rd day of the 30-day deadline, Caleb tried to negotiate. He had Tony forward an offer 6-month extension, 15% rent increase, co-branded PR campaign promoting the building. It was worded carefully, too carefully, as if he sensed there was something or someone on the other end who wouldn't be moved by numbers alone. Alan replied with 2 sentences. The lease terms are final. Should you choose not to renew, please prepare to vacate by the 1st. After that, nothing. No reply. Just a flurry of internal chatter I wasn't privy to, but could imagine with delicious precision Sierra pacing the office barefoot, phone to ear, whispering about finding a new space that's more on brand. Caleb snapping at interns, muttering about cash flow contingency plans, reputational damage. And me, I spent that evening folding laundry. Old cardigans soft with age. Tea towels I'd brought with me from the house I used to share with John. I moved slowly, letting my hands work as my mind wandered back to nights of reading bedtime stories, to Caleb, back to his first scraped knee, back to the way he used to reach for me when the world scared him. I let those memories pass through me like a tide. I didn't hold on to them. They didn't belong in the present. Not anymore. Because the man who once begged for one more story was now the man who watched me rinse dishes in silence while his wife turned their dining table into a branding summit. The man who once asked me how clouds worked had decided I was expendable, replaceable, invisible. But brick and mortar doesn't forget. Leases don't lie. Titles don't tremble. And power, when claimed without apology, becomes its own kind of healing. I didn't want him to suffer. I wanted him to feel it. The weight of choices. The price of silence. The shape of absence. Because I had been absent, hadn't I, present in form, but erased in meaning, no more. On the 30th day, I received confirmation from Tony that neither lease had been signed. No deposits. No communication. Just radio silence. I thanked her. And then, with steady hands and no rush in my pulse, I signed the eviction notices. 2 envelopes. 2 names. 1 message. You had your chance. I walked to the post office, mailed them certified, and stood in line like any other woman paying bills on a Thursday. No makeup. No drama. Just quiet power wrapped in wool and resolve. That night, I slept without waking. And in the darkness of downtown Los Angeles, 2 people who had once smirked at my place at their table now sat at desks they no longer owned, planning futures in buildings that no longer wanted them. It started with dust. Not grief, not revelation. Just dust, thick and soft like forgotten time clinging to my fingertips as I opened the cardboard box that had sat untouched in the corner of my closet since the day I moved in. I hadn't meant to go through it that night. I'd simply been looking for an old sweater, something thicker for the sudden chill in the air. But my hand landed instead on the worn lid of a storage box marked in faint cursive pen, N. Spring 1987. My sister's handwriting. I knew it instantly. Lily always wrote like she was about to be graded on penmanship. I stared at it for a moment, heart neither fast nor still, just waiting. I peeled back the flaps. Inside layers of life I had folded away without ever properly burying. A baby blanket, a hospital bracelet, a clipping of Caleb's first birthday announcement, a Polaroid me in the maternity ward, pale and exhausted, holding a bundled infant with eyes that looked not quite like mine. I had always brushed that feeling aside. Mothers aren't supposed to doubt the child placed in their arms. And I didn't, not exactly. I loved him, raised him, stood by him longer than I should have. But somewhere beneath the ache of motherhood and the duties that never paused, there had always been a whisper I never dared say out loud. He never felt like he came from me. I dug deeper. Beneath a stack of greeting cards, I found a manila envelope yellowed and slightly curled at the edges. It wasn't addressed, just sealed. I hesitated. Something in my chest stirred, and I pressed my palm over my heart like I could still it. Then slowly I slid my finger under the flap and opened it. Inside was a letter written in Lily's voice, her sharp, exacting tone softened only by the weight of confession. Nora, it began. If you're reading this, it means I never told you the truth. I read the rest in silence. Caleb wasn't Caleb, not by birth. There had been a mix-up at the hospital. She had known. The nurse had whispered it in panic 3 days after I gave birth when blood tests raised questions and 2 mothers asked too few. Lily worked admin at that same hospital back then. She had access. She was protecting me, she said. Protecting Caleb. Protecting everyone from a scandal that would ruin us all. I felt the air leave my lungs. Not sharply, not like being punched, but slowly like a room draining of oxygen in increments. I read the letter twice, 3 times. Then I turned to the documents included photocopies of medical files, a birth certificate with a different name. Leo Harrison, born the same day, same hospital, switched bassinets, raised elsewhere. I didn't cry. There was something too sacred about that moment for tears. Instead, I sat back in my chair and watched the shadows on the wall lengthen, letting this new truth settle beside me like an old friend finally come to visit. My life had not been what I thought. My motherhood had been rerouted. Not a lie, but not the whole truth either. And suddenly, everything made sense. Caleb's coldness, the distance that never closed. The nights I wondered if something in me had failed to bond, failed to reach him. It hadn't. I had felt what was real. I just hadn't known why. The next morning, I brewed coffee in silence and stared at the name Leo Harrison. I typed it into a search bar, half expecting nothing. But he was there. A small cafe bookstore in Highland Park. Locally owned. Community rooted. Estánido in 2012. The photo on the site was small, slightly out of focus, but I recognized the eyes. My eyes. He was leaning against a bookshelf holding a coffee mug, half smiling, like someone who knew the world could be both strange and kind. I didn't go there that day, or the next. I waited 3 more mornings walking past the cafe, each time pretending I had somewhere else to be, watching him from across the street. Watching the way he spoke to customers, laughed at children, helped an elderly man up the steps with one hand on his elbow. There was no arrogance, no calculation, just warmth, familiarity in motion. On the 4th morning, I stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed. He looked up, smiled, said, "Morning. What can I get started for you?" And something inside me, the part that had been searching for years, answered this. This moment. This voice. This man. Not as a son, not yet. But as something more honest than biology and more tender than regret recognition. I didn't tell him that morning. I ordered an Earl Grey and sat near the window pretending to read a book I wasn't really holding. He didn't recognize me, of course. Why would he? To him, I was just another older woman in need of warmth and caffeine. Maybe a soft corner of peace in a city that never stops talking. But I watched him with the same careful reverence I used to reserve for Caleb when he was small and sleeping back, when everything still felt possible. Leo moved like someone who knew where things belonged. Books, cups, conversations. His employees smiled with ease around him. Customers greeted him by name. A woman with graying braids handed him a tin of cookies and kissed his cheek like he was her son. And I felt no jealousy, only awe. He had grown in the light. Somewhere, some woman had raised him well. Not me, but someone. And that softened the ache, if only slightly. The next day, I returned, ordered the same tea, sat in the same spot. He nodded at me again, not remembering my order, but remembering my face, which was more than Caleb had done in months. "You were here yesterday, right?" he asked, and I nodded, smiling gently. "I was," I replied. "You have a lovely place." He laughed lightly, wiping his hands on a towel tucked into his back pocket. "It's a lot of work, but it keeps me grounded." I almost said it right then. Almost said, "I'm your mother." But how do you unspool an entire life with one sentence? How do you rewrite blood and memory and all the broken choices between? You don't. You wait. You listen. You build. So I kept coming back, morning after morning. He started remembering my order, started bringing my tea before I reached the counter, asked how I was called me. Miss Nora offered me leftover scones when he had too many. I told him I was retired, that I used to be a counselor, that I was recently rediscovering what it meant to have slow days. He said I reminded him of his high school English teacher, that I had a calm way of pausing before I spoke. He said it like a compliment, like trust. Weeks passed like chapters, not dramatic, just steady. And in that stillness, something unexpected bloomed, not desperation or longing, but respect, a mutual curiosity, a gentle friendship that wrapped itself around us like an old quilt stitched not by blood, but by the soft labor of returning. One Thursday, he sat with me, just for a moment. He said his delivery was late, and he had a few minutes. We talked about books, about weather, about childhood, and when he mentioned he'd been adopted, the air in my lungs paused. Not from shock I already knew, but from grief. The kind of grief that doesn't scream, doesn't claw, just sits beside you like a shadow that never left. They told me early on, he said. My parents were always honest about it. I got lucky. I wanted to ask about them, about his mother. I wanted to know if she baked, if she told bedtime stories, if she ever lost her temper or cried behind bathroom doors the way I had. But I didn't. I just nodded. And I said, "You really did." That night I opened the box again, held the letter from Lily, read it like a prayer. I thought I would hate her for not telling me, but all I felt was sorrow. Maybe she thought she was protecting me. Maybe she was ashamed. Maybe she didn't know how to fix what had already been done. It didn't matter. The truth was in my hands now, and the man who should have been my son was no longer a stranger. He was the barista who knew how I liked my tea, the shopkeeper who saved me a scone, the gentle presence who had no idea he had been missed for 66 years. I didn't know what came next. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't rushing toward revenge or away from pain. I was simply standing still in the presence of something whole. And maybe, just maybe, I could begin again. Not with Caleb, not with anger, but with Leo, with honesty, and with time. It started with an email. Not to me, of course. Caleb still didn't know who signed the new lease, but the subject line said everything urgent, office relocation timeline. The thread had been forwarded to Tony, and per our agreement, she copied me on it without comment. I read it in silence, standing at the counter with my tea steeping in the background, the morning sun casting long, sharp lines across the tiles. Caleb's message was short, panicked, brittle around the edges, full of urgency but lacking direction. He was trying to move, to salvage, to control what had long slipped through his fingers. I could feel the desperation in the timestamps: 1:47 a.m., 2:39, 4:15. Men like him don't sleep when they're losing something they thought they owned, especially when the thing they're losing is the illusion of permanence. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply opened my leather-bound notebook and drew a line across the last item in the left column: final notice delivered. It was done. The game was already over. They just hadn't accepted the score yet. Sierra's fall was louder. Social media always is. Her followers noticed first. The lighting in her videos changed backgrounds, inconsistent lighting slightly off. One asked if she'd moved. Another asked if she was still in the same vibe. She responded vaguely. Transitional phase, expansion, realignment. All code for we're being forced out, and I don't want to talk about it. But the cracks spread faster than she could paint over them. Clients canceled. Sponsors delayed renewals. One brand dropped her entirely after she tried to host a live stream in a borrowed yoga studio and forgot to mute her notifications, one of which, visible to thousands, read, "Eviction finalized. Last day confirmed." That clip went viral. I didn't watch it. I didn't have to. I already knew what failure looked like on her face. I'd seen it once briefly when she burned a roast the first Thanksgiving I spent with them and blamed me. Said I hadn't set the timer correctly. Caleb believed her, or at least pretended to. That was the night I ate in silence, scraping blackened turkey from the edge of the pan while they drank wine and took photos like everything was fine. Now they were both living in a world without edits. I didn't answer Caleb's first call, or his second. The voicemail he left was only 7 seconds long. "Mom, can you call me back? It's urgent. No apology, no remorse, just urgency." Like I was still on call, like I still owed him something. I let it sit. I walked to the bookstore instead. Leo was reading at the front counter, glasses low on his nose, completely unaware of the storm I had once lived inside. He looked up and smiled. "Your usual?" he asked. I nodded. And in that one moment, standing there surrounded by books, jazz humming through old speakers, and the quiet rhythm of a new life, I felt something I hadn't in years: peace. Not victory, not revenge. Peace. Back at my apartment, I opened my laptop and drafted a letter. Not to Caleb, not to Sierra, but to the Women Over 50 Foundation. A donation, $2 million, anonymous, for women starting businesses after loss, for women reinventing themselves without applause, for women like me. I wrote the check by hand. I sealed the envelope slowly. And when I dropped it into the mailbox, I didn't think of what I'd lost. I thought of what I'd reclaimed: my time, my name, my voice. Sierra's business collapsed within weeks. Caleb was denied the bridge loan he'd gambled everything on. Their accounts went quiet. And as they packed boxes in the very office space where I once waited in a lobby they told me to avoid because they were in a meeting, they still didn't know whose name was on the deed. They would, one day. But by then, it wouldn't matter. I wasn't looking back. I was building forward. The third voicemail came at 2:03 a.m. His voice cracked in the middle just once, but enough for me to hear it. "Mom, please, I need to know if this was you." He didn't yell, didn't accuse. Just that quiet desperation men like him aren't taught to show until it's far too late. I didn't delete it. I didn't respond either. I left it there in my phone like a folded letter, never sent, something that had weight but no destination. I sat in the dark for a while, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence that came after. That was the thing about silence. It wasn't empty. It was full of echoes of words withheld, of things we could have said but chose not to. Silence was my final language now, and I was fluent. In the morning, the building manager confirmed they had vacated their office space, early, broken lease and all. They left behind 3 whiteboards, an ergonomic chair, and a framed print that read, "Manifest your empire." I asked them to donate it. To whom I didn't care. The empire had collapsed under its own weight, and I was done watching. I walked past the building that day, not to gloat but to see. The windows were bare, the branding peeled off the glass. The foyer, once busy with tech bros and wellness influencers, now echoed with nothing but maintenance workers and stripped-down silence. I paused at the edge of the sidewalk. For a moment, I let myself remember. The first time Caleb brought me there, he was so proud, told me to wait downstairs while he met with someone important. He said I'd be more comfortable in the cafe next door. I drank lukewarm coffee for 45 minutes watching the clock. When he came back down, he barely said thank you, just waved goodbye, already on the phone with someone else. And now the whole floor was mine. Every square foot, every plug, every damn window. I turned and walked away. No pictures, no lingering, just a quiet step forward into the rest of my life. That evening, Leo asked if I wanted to help reorganize the fiction section. He'd noticed I always drifted toward the same shelf Steinbeck, Morrison, Atwood. He said he wanted a woman's eye on the layout. These stories deserve better order, he joked. I laughed and said yes. We worked side by side for 2 hours, moving titles, dusting spines, debating whether alphabetizing or genre first made more sense. At one point, he looked at me and said, "You're good at this. It's like you've done it before." I smiled. Once or twice. He offered me a permanent spot. "You don't have to say yes now," he said, "but I'd love for you to lead something here. Book talks, story circles, whatever you want." I didn't answer right away. I just looked around at the walls, the worn floors, the smell of paper and coffee and second chances. This place felt like something I had forgotten to imagine for myself. A life that didn't revolve around being needed or dismissed. A life built on presence, not utility. I looked at him and said, "I'll think about it." That night, I listened to Caleb's 4th voicemail. His voice was quieter now, tired. "I think I know it was you. I don't know why. Or maybe I do. Either way, I'm sorry." There was a pause. A silence so long I thought the message had ended. Then softer, "I miss when things were easier." And finally, "I hope you're okay." I turned off the phone. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just breathed long and deep like someone who had finally made it to shore after a storm so long, she forgot what dry land felt like. That was the last voicemail he ever left. I never called back. It didn't happen all at once. There wasn't some grand confession or teary explosion of truth. No big reveal over dinner. No camera-ready drama. I suppose part of me wished it could have been just for the neatness of it all. But life had never been neat with me. And with Leo, it didn't need to be. It was a Thursday when I finally told him. Late afternoon. The shop had quieted after the lunch rush, and he was restocking a shelf of used hardcovers when I walked in with a box under my arm. It was small, just enough room for a letter, a photo, and a memory that had waited 42 years to breathe. "You've been coming here a lot," he said, smiling over his shoulder. "Not that I'm complaining." I smiled back, nerves coiled under my skin like wires sparking. "Can we sit?" I asked. "There's something I'd like to give you." He looked surprised, maybe even a little concerned, but nodded, leading me to the quiet corner near the travel memoirs where the light always hit warm around 4. I sat across from him, the box between us, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. I just ran my fingers along the edges of the cardboard like it could give me courage. He waited, patient, still, like he knew something important was about to break through. "Leo," I said finally, "you've always been kind to me, more than you know, and I've been holding something back. Not out of fear, really, but because once I say it, nothing will ever be the same." He didn't interrupt, just nodded, encouraging me with a quiet strength I was still learning to recognize. 42 years ago, I began. I gave birth to a son, or at least I thought I did. His name was Caleb. I raised him, fed him, held him through fevers, paid for college, watched him grow into a man I couldn't quite reach. I swallowed hard. A few months ago, I found a letter from my sister. She'd worked at the hospital where I gave birth. There'd been a mix-up. The babies were switched. I opened the box, took out the letter and the photo beneath it, me in a hospital bed, smiling weakly, cradling a child I never truly knew. I placed them gently on the table between us. "Your name is Leo Harrison," I whispered, "and you're the child I was meant to raise." He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at the photo, then the letter, and finally at me. You're saying, "You're my yes," I said barely louder than a breath. "I'm your mother. By blood, not by memory, not by moments, but by truth." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It wasn't cold. It was sacred, like the air knew not to interrupt. He leaned back slowly, eyes not leaving mine. "I always felt different," he said at last. "I love my parents, my adoptive ones, but there was always a part of me that felt like I came from somewhere else, like I was built from a blueprint I never had access to." I exhaled. The kind of exhale you don't know you're holding until it leaves you shaking. I didn't come here to ask for anything, I told him. Not time, not forgiveness, not a place in your life. I just couldn't keep the truth from you. You deserve to know who you are, and that someone out there missed you without even knowing why. His eyes glistened then, not with tears exactly, but with something more complex. An ache that met mine in the middle. "Can I ask you something?" he said quietly. I nodded. "Why now?" I thought for a moment. Because I finally stopped chasing the wrong son, I said, and started listening to the part of me that never gave up looking for the right one. He didn't say anything else, just reached across the table and touched my hand gently, like a question, like an invitation. And in that moment, I didn't feel like I was reclaiming something. I felt like I was planting something entirely new, something tender, rooted, possible. We didn't rush into it. There were no grand gestures, no sudden embrace or declarations. Leo didn't call me mom, and I didn't expect him to. We just kept meeting, quietly, at the same table in the corner, week after week, like two old souls brushing past the edge of something larger than either of us could name. He started saving me a seat, brought me different blends of tea to try, introduced me to a regular as a dear friend who knows more about Steinbeck than the syllabus does, and I laughed not because of the compliment, but because of the ease in his voice, the comfort, the growing space I was beginning to occupy in a life I had once been denied. One afternoon, as the autumn sun slanted through the windows in soft ribbons, he sat across from me with a small notebook. "I've been thinking," he said, "about starting something here. A weekly gathering. Storytelling, book readings, open reflections, especially for folks in the second half of life, people who've seen things, who've lost and learned and kept going." I tilted my head. "That sounds beautiful." He smiled. "I want you to lead it." My breath caught. "Me?" "Yes," he said. No hesitation. "You've lived a dozen lives already. And when you speak, it feels like the room exhales. People would listen to you." I looked away for a second, not to hide emotion, but to let it settle. I had spent so many years being silenced, talked over, ignored, called the maid in my own son's home. And now here was this man, my son by blood, a stranger only in years, offering me a microphone not to scream but to share, to invite others into the spaces I had once been pushed out of. "What would we call it?" I asked softly. He grinned. "Second chapters." I nodded. "Then yes, let's begin." That week we made a flyer, printed it in soft earth tones, elegant font, nothing flashy, just the truth. Second chapters, stories from the lives that didn't end where they thought they would. And when the first Sunday came, I stood in front of 12 folding chairs, all filled with strangers holding warm drinks and curious eyes. And I told them a story. Not the whole story. Not yet. Just a piece of it. The one about the turkey that burned the wine that didn't taste right, and the moment a mother realized she had become invisible in her own family. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. They all understood, because they too had been overlooked, replaced, moved aside for louder voices or younger faces. When I finished, there was silence, not the awkward kind, but the reverent kind, the kind that holds space for something sacred. Then someone clapped, and then another, and then all of them, not out of pity, not for performance, but because something real had been said, and they recognized themselves inside it. Afterward, a woman with silver hair and trembling hands told me she hadn't spoken in front of a group in 20 years, but now maybe she would. Another man, a widower, offered to bring his late wife's poetry next time. And Leo, he stood by the door beaming, not proud in the way Caleb used to be after a win, but in a quiet, steady way, like he had planted something and was watching it bloom. That night, I walked home without music, without distraction, just the rhythm of my footsteps and the realization that I had stepped into a version of myself I'd forgotten was possible. I wasn't trying to reclaim the past anymore. I was writing something new, with my voice, my timing, my name. And in the glow of that bookstore between the pages and the people, I was no longer a woman who had been erased. I was the one holding the pen. They didn't know I'd be watching. I didn't plan to, but something in me said, go stand across the street where the old magnolia tree bends at the corner and just watch. Not for spite, not for some petty vindication, just to mark the ending. It was a Wednesday. The sky was soft gray, not yet raining, but heavy with the kind of air that tells you something is about to fall. Caleb and Sierra moved like people twice their age, dragging boxes out of the building that once held their dreams, their slogans, their little empire. No assistants, no interns, just them hunched over tape and silence. The elevator must have stopped working because they were taking the stairs. I remember Sierra's heels wobbling, her blouse clinging in the wrong places, not the curated look anymore. Just a woman who had spent all her pride and now only had receipts. Caleb didn't speak. He looked thinner, older. He didn't even glance toward the street, didn't scan for who might be watching. He didn't know I was there, or maybe he did, and he couldn't bear it. Either way, I didn't hide. I just stood still as that tree, arms folded, not with judgment, just with knowing. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cold. What I felt was closure. That kind of quiet relief you only get when a door finally shuts behind you and you know you'll never open it again. The final rent check had bounced. They didn't even try to fight it. By the time the new owners were announced, my name kept hidden through shell companies and trusted attorneys. It was too late for them to bargain. Sierra had tried to book a new space for her brand, but the market was tight, and reputation travels fast when eviction notices go viral. Caleb applied for consulting gigs. None called back. They blamed algorithms, the market, everyone but themselves. I watched them finish packing the last of it, a framed quote. Some ring lights, a vision board with the words X, impact now creased and curling at the edges. Sierra tossed it into the trash. Caleb didn't stop her. That was the last I saw of them. No final scene. No, I'm sorry. No come to Jesus moment. Just cardboard boxes, a dented car, and a slow pull away from the curb they once parked over like they owned it. I waited until the street cleared. Then I crossed. I entered the building not as a tenant, not as a visitor, but as the woman who owned the deed and every inch beneath their forgotten dreams. I didn't linger. Just a quiet walk through the now empty floor. Dust hung in the air like memory. I looked once toward the corner where Sierra used to film, and then I left. The next morning, I brought cookies to the bookstore. Leo was reorganizing again, this time the poetry section. The chairs are already set, he said. They're expecting you. I placed the tray gently on the front table, took a breath and smiled. I wasn't the maid. I was the story. I was the woman who rewrote the ending. And tonight I would tell them exactly how. There weren't many seats left when I stepped in. They'd arranged them in a semicircle tonight, tighter than usual, like people knew something different was coming. I wore my dark blue sweater, the one Leo said made me look like someone who belonged in hardcover. He handed me a cup of chamomile, smiled softly, and gave my arm a squeeze. "You good?" I nodded. Better than good. I was ready. I walked to the front of the room, not a stage, just a small space between two shelves of memoirs. Fitting. I turned to face them, 20 people, maybe 25. Gray hair, gold wedding bands, quiet eyes. A few younger faces too, ones who looked like they'd stumbled in by accident, but stayed because something in the air whispered, "You'll want to hear this." I didn't use a microphone. Didn't need it. I cleared my throat once, and I began. "My name," I said, "is not important tonight. What matters is this. Once, not long ago, I lived in a home where my son introduced me to strangers as the Maid. It was said like a joke. It wasn't funny. There were a few murmurs. A woman in the second row nodded slowly as if she too had been reduced to a title she never agreed to. I cooked. I cleaned. I paid bills I wasn't asked to pay. I gave and gave and gave. Until one day I stopped. I left. No screaming, no slamming doors. Just keys on a counter and a goodbye they didn't bother to chase. I let the words sit. Not to shock, but to breathe. I ended up in a studio apartment where the windows stuck and the radiator hissed like an old man clearing his throat. It was lonely. It was quiet, but it was mine. A man near the back chuckled gently. He knew that kind of silence. One night, out of habit or maybe stubbornness, I bought a scratch-off ticket. I didn't expect anything, but I won. A few eyebrows raised. I smiled. Not just money, a decision, a reset. I didn't tell anyone. I hired a lawyer. I studied. I bought a building, the one my son's company rented, the one his wife filmed her empire from. I rewrote their lease. They never knew it was me, until the eviction notice came. Silence again. This time heavy, but not judgmental, just respectful. They lost everything. I didn't gloat. I didn't interfere. I just let it happen, like gravity, like truth. I walked slowly across the space, each step deliberate. But that's not the story I came to tell tonight. That's just the preface. I paused, met a few gazes. Because after the dust settled, I found something I hadn't even known was missing. A letter, a name, a son. I turned toward Leo. He was still, unmoving. The boy I raised wasn't mine by blood. The man who runs this store was. And somehow life, in all its wild and crooked magic, brought us back to each other. I could see it now, the way they leaned in, not for gossip, not for thrill, but because this was a different kind of story. One they rarely heard in full. One where the woman at the center wasn't left bitter or broken, but standing, changed, still whole. We started this gathering to give voice to the stories that almost got lost, that were interrupted by someone else's ego or erased by someone else's agenda. And I'm here tonight, not as a victim, not as a millionaire, but as a woman who refused to let her ending be written without her. I folded my hands in front of me. Second chapters don't wait for permission. They begin when we do. A beat, then applause. Not thunderous, not performative, but steady, grounded, like the clapping of people who had been waiting to hear something real and finally got it. Afterward, they came one by one. A hug here, a whispered thank you there, a man who pressed a note into my hand that read, "Your story helped me forgive my daughter." A woman who asked if I'd read her journal one day because she hadn't had the courage to say her pain out loud yet. Leo stood at the edge just watching, like always. And when I reached him, he pulled me into an embrace that didn't need labels, just warmth, just knowing. That night I walked home slowly, streetlights stretching long across the pavement like golden arms waving me forward. I passed the building I owned. It stood silent, dark, a monument not to revenge but to reclamation, to the truth that power doesn't shout. It listens. It endures. It begins again. I opened my front door, kicked off my shoes, and set down the tray. I was tired, but not weary. I had work to do, not out of obligation, but choice. This was my story now, and I was going to keep telling it. If you believe it's never too late to reclaim your worth, subscribe for more true stories of dignity drama and quiet revenge.